hopefully it's still
A fighting fury, we're from Tigerland. In any weather you will see us with a grin, risking head and skin. If we're behind, then never mind, we'll fight and win, for we're from Tigerland. We never weak until the final siren's gone.
Good evening, Tigercast fans. Welcome to a very special Monday night episode. I know it's post-season, but it's always good to have special guests onto the show. We've got a ripper on tonight. He played 129 games in total, 17 goals. 56 of those games were as a Tiger. Famously wore the number 4 for Richmond. Andrew Raines, welcome to the show, mate. Thanks for jumping on.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
No, my pleasure. We were just sort of talking about the fact that it's Brownlow Medal night. I had a quick look, and you managed to poll 3 votes as a defender, which is ahead of a few other. I think you're beating the likes of Dave Asprey and Camden McIntosh and players like that. So not a bad outcome.
Yeah, it was a pretty good game, that game. I don't know if it was my best ever game, but no, it was certainly one of those games where I actually kicked my first goal that game too, so it sort of stood out. I kicked a goal from outside 50. I actually got a handball from my good old mate, Matthew Richardson, who gave me a handball, one of his,
rare.
Very few handballs. I was stirring up about that one, but I was screaming for it. If you watched the replay, and he had no other choice but to give it to me, and I banged one through, and then must have stood out to the umpires. I think I had 24, 25 touches that day off half back and a goal. So, yeah, jagged the 3 votes, and obviously pretty good year that year in 2006. So didn't get too many after that, or didn't get any at all, mate. Went my days at Brisbane playing a fair bit of that sort of lockdown defensive midfielder, you definitely don't get votes. But I mean, it's such a great award and obviously prestigious and notable. But I look at sort of the coaches' awards these days and the MVP. I think that's more of a better sort of indicator of how someone's season has been. Whether defender or a key forward or something like that. But anyway, it's good. It's on tonight, and I'm sure a lot of people tuning in.
It's a good point, though, about the coaches' votes, because often watching the Brownlow, I mean, Matt Rowell, not to shit can the bloke, got votes before, 17 disposals, 8 clangers, got 3 votes. And it's like, if that was a coach's vote, do you think they would view that type of game differently? And would they view a role like you played, tagging? If you shut down a Mark Rasciuto in his prime, things like that, surely from their perspective, that might get some votes from their end rather than from the umpires.
Yeah, and I remember that. I think in that year in 06, I think I polled, I vaguely remember some like 30 or something coaches' votes, which it was sort of probably my best year in that. But that was like, reward for some of those games. You mentioned that sort of game I played on Rasciuto, for an example. And, you lock something like that away, and the coaches really value that. And that's just one example. Thousands of players that have played and have done roles and things like that do stand out. So it's a very good point. And you raise that Rowell's obviously getting a fair few votes tonight, and he had an incredible year, and hopefully wins it. But I think it's sometimes they just sort of miss certain things, and the coaches obviously pick up on it too. But yeah, it's obviously a different element and different viewpoint for an umpire compared to a coach.
One last one on the Brownlow from Rational Roman. Did your dad tell you he was robbed of the Brownlow?
Yeah, I've heard that. I think I've heard that probably a million times throughout my journey. As a kid, he told me the story, and then obviously when you come through the ranks and you hear more of it in the media and things. I think there was an article about, might have been the Dusty won it. Obviously they share fair commonalities, those two, with the number 4 and best and fairest and things like that. But one thing Dad didn't get was a Brownlow, and obviously I wasn't alive at the time, but reading and talking to him, going in favour, he felt he sort of robbed it in a sense. And back in those days too, it was the old. I think he tells the stories of 1 votes. They do the rounds, so obviously it was a bit different to these days. But they do the 1 votes, the 2 votes, and then they announce the 3 votes, like a good old. I think the junior presentations like a bit too. So, and they said, "Don't worry, you'll get all 3 votes," and he didn't get 3 votes. And I think because the cameras were on him and the expectation and that, but he said he wouldn't trade it for the world because a couple of days later he runs out and wins a premiership medallion with Richmond in 1980. So, the individual awards are great, but certainly those premierships count a lot more.
Absolutely, I think every player would say the same thing, but. What have you been up to since life after football? I mean, for those who, or no one would be aware, but we sort of have worked together on helping out with the one-on-one football academy stuff. So tell us a bit about that. Your time at the Sun, you were doing some work there too with the academy kids too.
Yeah, so a lot of people probably sort of whether they remember or not, I'd probably focus more. This crowd would focus more on the Richmond stuff, and they probably remember me playing for Brisbane. But it sort of left out a bit that I did spend a year at the Suns. I did the full 360. I grew up on the Gold Coast. Obviously, Dad had some clubs too, and Dad we moved up in the late 80s when I was only one in 1987, and we stayed up here because obviously the Bears. The Bears started. He was one of the first in those days at the Brisbane Bears, and we stayed up here ever since. So I grew up on the Gold Coast, and the opportunity to come back to Queensland after Richmond and Brisbane, and then the Gold Coast actually went around at the time, and but then the opportunity came when I got delisted from Brisbane. Lepage came into the Lions and was a bit of a youth policy at the time. I was 28, 29 with a bit of a dodgy knee, which happened to Richmond, my dislocated patella, which we'll probably touch on shortly. But it was sort of coming to the end, and I had a bit of a life on with the Suns, and they weren't expecting me to sort of play many senior games that year. I only played 6 through injury, sort of rookie list mature ages. And my role was more to mentor and coach a really young sort of twos team. And it was fantastic. I fell in love with the role, and they offered me the head coach of the academy, which, again, back in those days, it's going back sort of 10 years ago now, and now what the academy's come to sort of help sort of pioneer the academies up here, and they've actually turned a lot of the Southerners down there. I'm based on the Gold Coast still, and they're not happy with Northern academies just pumping out talent now as they do, which you can see two sides. Probably won't get on that debate tonight, but I ran that for 5 or 6 years, and sort of COVID hit. And it was an opportunity where I've always had my fingers in a few pies, or probably not the word. It's probably more so I've had backup plans along the way. When I played, I did a property degree at university, majored in property as a business degree. So I've always enjoyed the business commerce sort of sides, but fell in love with the coaching too, and had this idea around access to coaches and how you would go about doing that in football. I was coaching the academy, and I couldn't spend a lot of individual time with these kids, and I was getting a lot of questions. Oh, how do I get better at kicking? How do I get better at marking? And who do I see? So a bit of an entrepreneurial mind, and put a really basic platform at the time together. We had about 10 coaches and connected them with athletes around Australia. And then we grew through COVID, through obviously all group training being cancelled and AFL coaches losing their jobs. We got a bit of really good PR, and we grew to about 150 coaches on the platform. So we're a marketplace where we connect athletes with coaches for private tuition, one-on-one coaching. And we've dipped our toes in a few different sports after footy. We've dominated sort of the AFL market throughout Australia. Been going for about 5 or 6 years now. Would have been over probably 15 to 20,000 sessions, and about 250, 260 coaches have gone on or off the platform. And we're about to do a pivot towards creating software for more private sports coaches. So I think of golf, think of tennis, and how they operate their businesses. And a lot of them are on the back of an envelope or the old Google form on their website. So what we're doing is compiling everything we've learned at one-on-one coaching. There will be a name change shortly, but we're still running with one-on-one coaching at the moment, which I'm sort of keen to announce shortly and launch a new product. And that'll be, pretty much giving these private coaching sports businesses an opportunity to run their business off a one-stop shop through an app. So, really looking forward to that.
I think I was reading that it really got the backing of the AFL Coaches sort of association during that COVID time as a way to support coach. I think you got picked up Josh Fraser, it might have been, when he the soft cap cut was tremendous, wasn't it, through the AFL ranks? So to get that kind of backing from a high level obviously really helped put you on the map, and you've taken it and run with it.
It's been a really good affiliation with those guys, because it's actually and Josh is only one of many that have sort of come on board, and they've lost a bit of income. And again, as we see with globally at the moment, the cost of living and everything, these coaches have got 1 or 2 dedicated days off, and they dedicate that to some coaching, and they pick up 4 or 5 sessions. They're not only just doing it for the income's obviously important to them, the young families and things like that, but it's also the purpose, a bit of purpose and fulfillment they get by connecting with local community in kids that are looking to sort of get better with their skills. So there's some really good stories out of that, and again we're branching off to other sports, and we're really excited about our journey.
And being up in Queensland, what's the vibe of the football been like there recently? I mean, having a Q Clash semi-final was probably not on a lot of bingo cards, I would have thought, at the start of the year. And having played for both clubs, how are you feeling about that game? And yeah, what's the general atmosphere been like?
Oh, it was incredible. Just the whole vibe, especially on the Gold Coast. Gold Coast, everyone probably reads up on it, just haven't had much success with their sporting organisations. You see the Titans are still struggling in the rugby league, and there's been soccer clubs up here that have failed and whatnot. So there has been a lot of, comments or commentary around the Suns, and to finally really sort of get that win make the finals and then get that win and then play the Lions was just a bit of a dream come true in terms of just that, you talk about pioneering something. I think for many people that have been involved up here for 15 years and again, they've been well compensated through the AFL and the AFL. I think, what did Ross Lyon call them, the Nepo babies? But, again, it's two sides to everything. It's not easy up here. It's getting easy, which is good. A lot of kids are playing football, but, it's had its challenges. So to be around that was fantastic to coach all those kids in the academy. There was 6 kids playing in that Q Clash or the final up at the Gabba that were in the academy that I was running at the time, and then throwing the 2 Ashcroft boys, which I had a fair bit to do with. They were in the Suns Academy too. When Marcus was actually my boss there, the general manager of football there at the Suns. So having that connection with a lot of those kids now, young men, is fantastic to see. And then from a holistic point of view in Queensland, I think it's in really good shape.
Yeah, it looked like a tremendous sort of atmosphere and vibe. So I'm sure we're going to see them competing many more years to come. But you made your debut for the Tigers back in 2004, round 22 against the Swans. What was it like getting that debut game, just finally getting that tap on the shoulder and say, hey, you're in?
Yeah, it was, well, it happened pretty quickly. If you think about it, back then you get drafted in your 17th year. You had to be 18 before the June the next year. So I was a March born. So I actually got drafted at 17. So I had another year at my belt, but Greg Miller, I'll give a bit of a background story. Greg Miller at the time was the list manager, and I remember him flying up to watch one of my under-18s games here in Queensland. Totally different, no academies back then. It was Queensland was a market, without sort of speaking down towards where Queensland football was back then. It was I used to play junior football here, and there wasn't a huge amount of competition. You play in the national comps and all that sort of stuff, and there's a bit better competition. But for me to get to Melbourne and get drafted, that with a year up my sleeve, the whole year was about playing VFL, and even not even VFL at the time. They plucked me to pretty much get me ready for the following year. And the story behind it was they actually lodged some paperwork, got rejected by the AFL at the time. They actually lodged some paperwork thinking, I came down at 71, 72 kilos, so I was pretty light at the time, and they were a bit worried about me playing VFL. It was a fair step up. I played a couple of senior QAFL games up here, but fair step up in the VFL. So essentially I was last on the list, pretty much. There's obviously a couple of other guys who got drafted at the time were fairly young, but for me to come out of Queensland and to be sort of undersized a bit, they were trying to play me in the TAC Cup back then as an 18-year-old, into whether it was Sandringham or whatever, and it got knocked back. And I put on about 6 kilos pretty quickly in the pre-season. Back then you weren't held back in pre-season. I remember down at Sandringham, my first pre-season session, I'm doing 800. So you weren't held back. You're actually probably doing more. So I really fast-tracked that, broke into the VFL side round 1 for Coburg, and played on and off the bench. You could play sort of a fair bit of bench time back then, and played sort of a half-forward wing role. And the back end of the year, I just, it was in a really good environment, some really good Coburg leaders, like VFL leaders, along with some really good Richmond listed players. It was actually Spud's last game, the great Danny Frawley. It was his last game. I got a tap on the shoulder. I remember Danny calling me and said, we're going to play. There was a bit of word at the time. I think I was averaging sort of 25, 26 in the VFL for wing, and for the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks before I debuted, and there was a bit of talk I might have got the opportunity. I think where they were at the ladder to Richmond, I was probably a bit ahead of my time, but they decided to give me a game, and it was very beneficial because it sort of springboarded me in the next sort of couple of years.
I'm not sure you would have been thinking about this side of things at the time being a young player, but was there a different vibe around the club given that Spud had announced like the departure had been set in place midway through the year? Did anything change, do you think, from a messaging or the players' perspective? I think I read somewhere that the club even pitch to have playoffs sitting in the coach's box with Spud for the last couple of games. I think he knocked on
I think
the head.
they sort of knew, yeah. It was
Yeah,
quite
was it
obvious.
weird?
Yeah, but I tell this story a fair bit. I probably haven't experienced it myself. So players obviously been around there a long time, would have thought it was quite odd. But for me, I didn't know that was the norm. So
Yeah,
I was under a fair bit of pressure. He handled it really well. And we just did, looking back on it, we just didn't have the list. It was some young blokes like myself coming through, and then the following year Brett Delidio and that draft that sort of came through, and we had some early draft picks that some worked, some didn't. And then you had that top end that was on sort of the back end of their career. So we probably just didn't have the sort of the quality in a list back then. And then a player comes in and it sort of totally changes things.
Well, you won 10 games in 2005. Was there a stark difference between the coaching styles or over that off season? Was there anything that changed, or was it just the new players you got in and just a breath of fresh air and results started to go your way?
No, I'll play out a fair bit of aura around him, especially early days. And then I still distinctly remember the really couple of really hot days leading to Christmas and training at Punt Road there and playing a thing that he used to call he used to call it the rings handball game. So he literally got these rings design made up of steel or metal or whatever, and they had like a basketball ring, but it was facing vertical. So you obviously used to handball through it. And it was just like a 6v6 game. To start with, it was 30 metres apart, so short handball games, and he ended up building it up. It was still handball, I'm pretty sure. He may have been kicking, but it was ended up becoming like an 80-metre field, and it was up, down, up, down, up, down. It was harder than doing those 800s that I mentioned. I remember just, having times where you just dry reaching, and so you could see that he was really trying to implement that run and dash attacking footy, which really suited me. It was sort of my signature at the start of my career. So, I sort of played some pretty good footy under him, and you could sort of just set the standard from that level. And obviously 05 with Brownie was on fire, and then after that injury, we sort of went downhill from there. So there's a fair bit to that year, but sort of for myself, I was still in and out a fair bit. I think I was emergency, maybe 13. I think I played 6. You probably got there, but I played one game my first year, 6 in my second. I reckon I was emergency about 12, 13 times. So I say to young kids these days, you got to do your apprenticeship. Obviously, it can take a bit of time, and that was sort of my first 2 years.
And then 2006, you had your breakout year playing all 22 games, came second in the Rising Star, and I think it was second in the BNF as well, which was a quality year. What was the turning point for you to generate that type of season?
Oh, there's a few things. I think a bit of self-belief. I'm actually distinctly remember walking away in 05 and I thought there's a couple of things. I remember management crew at the time, and Dad obviously had a fair bit of input too, just for some advice on that. And I remember you got a 2-year contract, so 04, 05, which if you go back to the conversation, well, 04 was really nearly my under-18s year. So 05 was nearly really my first year of senior footy, and then 06 is my second. So I thought it was a bit harsh to sort of – I had 2 years, 04, 05, and then they only offered me a 1-year deal. It was actually the best thing ever. So they only offered me 1 year in 06, and I had to take it. And I said, right, this is time to really stamp myself on it. And Plough said a couple of comments, which I reckon Plough had a pretty good gauge on me, knew that I responded pretty well to negative feedback. The kids probably don't take negative feedback well these days. I actually used to really bottle it up and get the old I told you so type of attitude, or a bit of the chip on the shoulder. So he sort of said, sat down the end of the season, said, you're elite in no categories. He said there's 5 categories. I distinctly remember, I might not get them all right, but it was speed, endurance, that from a sort of a physical point of view. Then it was, footy IQ, skills, and it might have been like toughness or courage. And he said, you're mediocre in a lot of those areas. And, I thought I was pretty, I was only 19 at the time, but maybe he saw something in me and knew how to motivate me. And I went away that pre-season. Remember, I didn't go away and I trained. It's always, you think back to just doing extras. And I remember just getting, okay, I'm going to be, I know I'm quick, so I'm going to get back then they used to have a 20-metre dash, and they had the tan time trial, the infamous tan botanical tan time trial, the Botanical Gardens. I remember getting my times down and being top 5 in the speed thing, up with Delidio and those sort of couldn't beat lids, but up in those sort of times, and then really braced myself to my attack on the footy and toughness. I really wanted to tick that box. And, within the couple of the pre-season games, I remember a player coming to me, he said, I've got a match up for you round 1, you're in. This was like after the first or second gamey. So I reckon you could play a really good lockdown defender role, but counterpunch, get off these defenders, use your run and carry. And he put me on Bob Murphy. It wasn't a great night that night, but it was a good night for me personally. I think we got beaten by about 80, 90 points under the roof there in round one against the Bulldogs in 06, but played really well on him. And I remember that was sort of the start of my form, and just really grew with confidence, and player really backed me with my role.
And how much do you learn playing on a player like Bob Murphy? Like, you were assigned some tough tasks when you were playing. How much do you take from those matchups and implement them into your own game or learnings for future games?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think, reflect back to my career, and I actually talk about challenges and that sort of attitude. I actually used to love a challenge. So then in my career up here at Brisbane, had some really good duels on Gary Ablett, who was winning Brownlows at the time, and I actually played my best games against Gaz. So I just remember maybe my personality or whatever was, give me a job, I'll do it, I won't let you down. And then secondly, they lead you to the football too. So then you're an opportunity to win the ball too. And I backed myself in with my skills and the ability to be able to run and break lines. So that was sort of my game in a nutshell.
He also got selected for the International Rules Series for 2006, which is now a bit infamous for maybe not all the right reasons. But what was it like training under Kevin Sheedy as your coach? He's obviously very iconic. And then playing with some of the players that were on that list, like the Favolas, Voss, Ryan Crowley, Barry Hall. I mean, upon reflection, the side did kind of seem geared towards a certain type of play style. But what was that experience like playing with those players and under Kevin Sheedy?
Yeah, well, and then after they sort of made, I think it was like the All-Australian. So it wasn't quite, you had to obviously have a good year, but Sheeds was trying to pick running, because you think about the balls on the ground a lot. It's a round ball, and he wanted to create pressure. So he had a bit of a mantra in the way he go about it. In saying that, obviously my year was pretty good. I think I was one of the youngest on tour. And mate, that was incredible. I didn't play a final in 129 or 130 games. So that was my final for me on reflection. Winning in 87.5, I think it was 87,000 people at Croke Park the day we won it by aggregate. They beat us in the first one, and we won the second one by aggregate, and we lifted up the cup and playing with some of those players was just incredible. And that's sort of a bit of the story. What got me back to Queensland was I roomed with Michael Voss the first night or two in Galway.
Okay.
And he was someone I just idolised as a kid growing up in Queensland. And to pick Voss's brain, obviously had a lot of respect for him, and he'd been sort of watching my progress too as a young guy coming through, and knew obviously my background, and we just clicked and connected and got each other's numbers from there. I think he went in the media for a bit and was a good ally in the media to have for a year or two there. Then he reached out when things didn't go that well after a couple of injuries at Richmond, and that's sort of what brought me home. So the Island tour was incredible. The Fev thing, probably a topic for another night, but that's all fun and games, and reflecting back on that, it was just an incredible year all round, really, for what I achieved in 1 year at 20 years of age.
Getting sidetracked a little bit, but in a similar vein, what's your thoughts on State of Origin? It sounds like it's coming back in Feb. As a player, is that something you would have been all for? Like, would you be happy to play in those type of games pre-season or mid-season, whenever it might be?
Yeah, I think so. And they did that one in sort of, I think I was injured, or may have been sort of a chance if it was sort of on the back of 06, 07. I think it was end of 07, 08. I think they played one in the centennial year. And I think Nathan Foley and Troy Simmons, a few like Richo played in that. So they had an opportunity back then, but they haven't really done sort of much since. And whether you did it every couple of years, I thought could be an opportunity. But now there's a fair bit of hype behind it, and I think it'll go really well. I think sort of bad one to sort of tick over. Everyone's sort of saying it was a better mid-year, do you risk injuries in February, but sort of bad time to do it now with no pre-season games and kick the season off in a sort of a good fashion. I think it's we'll see, but I think it's a really good thing for the AFL to bring it in.
Yeah, I think people will get right behind it as long as the players buy into it. I think they'll draw a crowd. And injury-wise, I've always sort of thought you probably equal a chance to do an injury at training, doing match sim or something like
correct.
that, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good preparation for the year. You're right. If you get the best players, the crowds will follow.
And 2007 had another strong year, 22 games, but the club went backwards that year. Was that a frustrating year from a club level? I think we finished last with just 3 wins, which I don't think was overly expected. How did that sort of go down internally?
Yeah, it was sort of interesting to look back at it all. Like you sort of see the player comes in, we win those games in 05, argue with Brandon didn't go down. Would have that changed things? 06, we had some incredible wins. We had some really bad losses, like a couple of 100-point defeats, I remember. And we had really poor percentage. I think we just finished 9th, but we were sort of 2 or 3 games out of in reality from the 8. So we were obviously a bit off it. And then there's a fair bit of hype going into sort of 07, but that's when I sort of talk about the list was sort of just, you had Callaway and Gasper and those sort of experienced players that probably hanging on for another year. But in saying that, they were really important for us. And so for me personally, they got injured. And because I was, not a bad sort of lockdown defender, Plough ended up playing me on sort of as centre back and played on Reebok twice, Chris Tarrant, which a lot of the media, back then you could sit and start. So Graham Pollack was our loose defender or Joel Bowden. So they would sit Bowdo or Pollack to give me some insurance in the air on these taller guys. You could start even at centre bounces, one behind the ball. So we did that. But, so having Callaway and Gasper out, I was heavily relied on to sort of play those roles. And it's no one's fault, but, I just felt my development sort of went sort of a bit backwards from there in terms of just that year. Like I had a reasonable year, again, consistent. I think even they marked me a bit harder, maybe in the best and fairest. I think I finished 11th or just outside the top 10. So I was a bit disappointed in that. But in saying that, I was doing a lot of these roles and that lack of sort of bounce off half back. And even my role was best on small defenders and to be able to play and get off. And, I was in really good touch coming back from Ireland. I still remember in the 07 going in, I think they do this sort of pre-season award. It doesn't mean much in pre-season, but we used to really hold pre-season in pretty high regard. You play the 4 pre-season practice games. And I think I sort of got voted or something, sort of one of the best players in that sort of campaign. So I felt like my preparation was really good. And again, had a reasonable year. But, personally and as a collectively, we just sort of stunted in our development a bit and, put a fair bit of pressure on everyone.
Tough ask playing against some of those names you mentioned, like Nick Rewalt. That shouldn't have had to have fallen into
No, it shouldn't have happened. And they were sort of laughing in the media. But in saying Plough then put me on him the second time I played. He goes, mate, I reckon you played pretty well on him. I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know. And even Rui, because Rui and I grew up in Queensland. He's a couple of years older than me. He sort of texts me after the game. So he goes, mate, you're actually pretty hard to play on. So it was a nice compliment. But, obviously it was one-on-one. He'd be able to sort of, which he did. He took a couple of really good marks and goals on me. But, that was sort of the year I had. It was a bit frustrating in terms of that.
And then obviously in 2008, your season was fairly heavily dislodged by the knee injury. How did that impact not only 2008, but I suppose the rest of your career? Because it almost felt like it started a domino effect in what led to you going to Brisbane and then obviously to the Suns afterwards.
Oh, absolutely. It sort of did start a domino effect, and speak to a lot of my old teammates and at the time and sort of I never really came back probably the same player after that. It was a bit sort of sad in some sense, but at the same time too, is you look back and crystal ball stuff, and it wouldn't change it for the world because it led me back to Queensland, and I'm settled up here now and set me up, and the world's meant to be that way. But on reflection, I sort of look back and the knee injury really did cut me down in my prime. I think I sort of bounced back. They gave me back my sort of role as that sort of running half back, and I think I started the pre. We beat Carlton in 08. Round 1. I think I was even pushing up towards the wing and a bit sort of midfield time. I think I had a reasonable game that night, and then I think I started the game really well against, I'll never forget, North Melbourne. And we weren't going that well, but I felt like I was starting to really get some momentum back in my game. And just this innocuous sort of, as you do when you do knees, and everyone felt fortunate at the time I was doing an ACL. On reflection, I'd probably rather do an ACL and have the complete year off and rebuild, get back, because ACLs actually, given the time, actually recover as good as your other knee. What happened here with the dislocation, probably sort of unnoted a fair bit at the time. They said just a dislocated patella, he'll be back in a couple of weeks. And I think everyone thinks that dislocated patella back then was the old, remember that vision of, who was it? I think it was Darren Creswell. He's whacking his knee back in.
Yeah.
And everyone thought, I'll whack the knee back in and you get up and start running it. It's unfortunate everyone's body's different, but B, mine was pretty complicated. And the club had actually never seen a patella, or they haven't handled a patella. So I was sort of a bit of a test bunny. So they had me running and was struggling at the time. I couldn't get back in. I was running in 2 weeks. I had this bone bruise. I remember limping, and then my quad just lost, I relied on my strength of my legs and my speed and my agility. And they sort of half rushed me back. The swelling went, and I was still really hurting. And, at the time, you sort of, as a 22-year-old male back then, you sort of just push through it. And I came back through the twos because I missed 10 weeks. And my first game back was pretty good. And I said, oh, I'm back here. And then pulling up from that was really sore. And I got stuck back in the twos for probably 2 or 3 weeks. I said, we just need to see consistency, still limping around a bit. And then I started ripping my quad off my, on the same size as my leg. And so that was the year done play. I said, just get yourself right. No worries. Went away, had a massive preseason, came back in 2009. I thought we're ready to go again. Had an awesome preseason campaign. Round 1 comes, the Ben Cousins game, first game, and everyone remembers Cuzzy doing his hammy in that fourth quarter. About 5-10 minutes later, I think I did my knee. Same knee, not the dislocation, never dislocated again, but just complications post that injury, and did my lateral meniscus. So it was a significant sort of injury, about 6 to 8 week injury. Again, rushed back, draining fluid out of the knee, probably wasn't rehabbed and had the best advice at the time. It's not discrediting the club, but everyone was under a fair bit of pressure. And then came back through the twos, trying to get back through that, and then started ripping my hammy. So it was all, it'd be the knee, then soft tissues, and then came back, and the knee was sort of, again, we're getting 60 to 100 mils of fluid drained every week to try to get through twos game. And then some political stuff happened, which, again, I won't go into too much detail, but I was at the end of a pretty big 3-year deal, which I'd only played really 1 year in 07 after that incredible year in 06. And, if I was a club too and you're a business and an organisation, you're looking to go, well, how are we, paying this guy fairly good money and he's on a long-term deal? I think there would have been a contract there, but I had to start exploring my options because Terry got the flick at the same time, and Terry is probably one of my allies, and Jay Rawlings got the job and didn't do me any favours. I know sort of what was going on there, whether his hand was sort of held from potentially not playing me, but I thought I should have been playing at the time, even with a sort of a half dodgy knee, and couldn't get back in the back end of 09 and finished the year off in the twos. And that's when I sort of connected with Vossi and got back to Queensland. They offered me a 3-year deal, which in hindsight was incredible, just that security, get back and have a bit of a change, get back up to the warmer weather and hopefully sort of regenerate my knee.
So thinking back to that initial injury, if they'd have just known, I suppose, a bit more about it at the time, I guess, and you sat out for the 6 to 8 weeks or 12 weeks, whatever it might have been, because these days there's no way you'd get away with running in 2 weeks, far less coming back and playing. It seems crazy now, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I speak to a lot of supporters. It's probably good that I'll open up tonight because they might get a bit more insight too. It's probably sort of goes a bit. I think everyone heard about my injuries, but it was probably a mix of what sort of happened. I had a bit of a knee, and then he had this and that, but it was actually a really significant injury. And at the time, after 2 or 3 years, I had 2 or 3 operations too at Richmond at the time with the dislocation and the meniscus in the end. And it was in the end of the day, and that's when I finished up the Suns. It was a degenerative knee, and I was always going to have my career cut short. I end up retiring at 29, 30, and it probably just goes a lot of supporters probably would have sort of forgotten about it, and that's sort of how it sort of unfolded in the end.
So just that initial injury, there was no turning back from it. It was always going to get you in the end, wasn't it?
It was nearly sort of the cascading intervention that I sort of sort of got. But in saying that, I held on, and we'll probably get onto it shortly.
Yeah.
But really proud of sort of how I got through it in the end, and sort of reshaped and rebottomed the game.
That's incredible because I didn't know the depths of the knee injury. That's quite incredible. Your time up in Brisbane obviously was really enjoyable for yourself. You played some good footy up there. What are some of your fondest memories of playing with the Lions?
Probably just again, like any club. I mean, I look at Richmond and look back to that, and I just think what an incredible club to play. I mean, we were at the peak of our powers. I missed that by about, what was that, sort of 7-8 years afterwards that I left. That's where they really sort of came back to their glory days, which so many people would talk about when I was at the club about when sort of Dad played, and even before that sort of vintage. But to even have 60,000 people and 80,000 and just big supporters, and the people that I met off the field too in business and all that sort of stuff, I think really was a highlight. And the connections that I formed in Melbourne really set me up. And then I go to Brisbane. It was just such a, how would I describe Brisbane? Just such a different feeling going. Even Brisbane back then as a city. I mean, Brisbane's a world-class city now, but this is going back 09, 10. And it was a very sort of small city. Jonathan Brown would go out and Blackie, and they wouldn't get hardly recognised. Brownie probably would, but Blackie would probably sneak under the radars. And these guys that have won multiple premierships and champions of the game, and just really good guys too, and got a lot out of them, trained really hard and forged really good relationships up there with with some really good guys, and just playing back in the home state in incredible conditions in the middle of winter, training in the Gabba, and 25 degrees in July. It's just incredible, and that sort of helped my body, and just had to change my role a fair bit. So 2010 came back, played another. So that was the third year of injuries. I came back round one. Knee was actually feeling pretty good. The Lions medical staff really got it back in really good shape, and then started doing soft tissues again. So just the conditioning and getting back into sort of that the AFL. So I think I did a calf, a hamstring, and a quad in the 1 year, and then I was put on ice back into 2010. I think I played 10 games that year. And then in 2011, I remember it was a bit of a sort of a fork in the road, and I was at the sort of crossroads a bit, only at 25, 26, another 2 years in my contract. But I remember going to Vossi saying, how can I get it? I think I can play in the midfield and add some value. How can I get a game? And he said, well, you're competitive and you're fit. You've got the ability to play on these good players. How would you be able to sort of a tagging role? And I said, look, I'll take it. I just want to get back into opportunity. And that's sort of what presented. It went away. I wasn't the best endurance runner at Richmond. I had more speed, but then it sort of flipped. I lost a tiny bit of speed through my knee, but I picked up my endurance and became just really fit, dedicated professional player, and my professionalism lifted. I was probably, sort of prided myself on being the most professional there, and sort of put 3 years, I think 11, 12, 13 of some really consistent games, and ended up playing more games at the Lions than the Tigers in the end, even though I spent more time at Richmond, obviously those injuries, but playing sort of close to 70 games there, and playing on some of the, you mentioned Ablett, you name midfielders in those days, that sort of 12, 13 years, I played on them, and did fairly well, and again didn't have quite the success that Brisbane have now, but laid some foundations, and sort of really enjoyed my time.
Was Ablett the toughest opponent from a tagging perspective?
Actually, had probably my best outcomes. And we used to struggle on Swan and Pendlebury a bit. Collingwood used to just belt us. Back then, they were playing some pretty good footy, and it's really hard to tag when you're getting sort of belted by an opposition. And they were probably a bit bigger than me. Those two sort of matched up pretty well against even though Gaz is pretty that low, centre gravity, quite probably thicker than me through the legs and the core, but he had some pretty good matchups, but probably the best player to sort of play on him. And again, named some of those midfielders in the Dangerfield, played on him in his early days, and did fairly well on him, and some really good matchups with some other players.
Do you think there's room in today's game for tagging? It kind of feels like it's starting to creep back in. I know we've seen Jack Ross and Cameron McIntosh do a little bit of tagging this year, and it seemed to work quite well, but we just, as a team, aren't in the spot to capitalise and get the wins. Do you think there's a place in the game for it?
Well, I think you've just got to do sort of similar what Josh Dunkley does. I know Geelong, you should say the grand final, so Geelong play those sort of the Irish guys on real lockdown roles, which I think Chris Scott's just an incredible coach. I'm a big believer of that, not being biased. I think you've got to lock one or two away. But then it's a flip side, because I think it was a wrong matchup. It's still side bottom going to McCluggage the other night in that, and so Collingwood go the tag, and then Brisbane get a run on. So therefore McCluggage is getting the ball, and side bottom's not, so it doesn't work. So you've got to have your team performing for the tagger to have some influence. So the tagger will have the influence on the player, but I think it's that fine balance. And then when it terms of just lockdown and tagging, I think you've got to play probably the Josh Dunkley role. You've got to be able to win the footy, but you've obviously got to then try and nullify your opponent.
It's a fair point, because I suppose when you look back at like the Ryan Crowleys and things like that, where it seemed very much more about the man, whereas now you use Dunkley as an example, who can win the ball himself and hurt the other way, which I think is the more modern way of doing it. Right. Speaking of the grand final, what are your thoughts on the game, Brisbane up against the Cats? Can the Lions go back to back?
I think they can. They're going to have to be right on their game. I think Brisbane, at the peak of their game, they've shown it in pieces this year. I think they're as good as anyone. I think they're probably the most side that's probably unstoppable. But then you look at Geelong, they've got that edge of unstoppability. Like they're incredible when they get their run on too. But I think they're very structured. And then they've got little, you've got those taggers I was talking about before. But then they've got Dangerfield that can roll in, roll out. Then you've got like blitzers can play on multiple. So they flip roles really well. I don't think any other teams do that. So it'll really depend on how their sort of their strengths and their weapons to their game style and their system come to fruition on the day. So it's going to it's going to be great. But I hope it's a close game. I really do. I don't want to see another grand final blowout. So
no, I know they're no good unless you're on the side that's winning
correct.
by the margin. But we talked about injuries before. The Lions have got a big call to make in terms of Lachie Neale coming back to play in this type of game. Where do you sit on that side of things? How much say does the player versus the doctor versus the coach have, I guess, in these types of scenarios when you're talking about one of your best midfielders?
Yeah. You just love to have that crystal ball, wouldn't you? So if they go on and win it and you play him, even if you played him as a sub, and then that you sort of got him as backup, and whether you can rotate, and you win it, you go, well, here comes a player of his ilk deserves the 2-time premiership medal.
Yeah.
And if they lose, and then you go, well, we lacked, let's say they do start him, whatever, and he re-injures it, and then it all looks like it's gone to water. So. Just love that crystal ball. I think they play him, but geez, it'd be interesting because he was totally ruled out. Like that's where I'm sort of obviously he's made an incredible comeback. Yeah, that's where it's interesting. And calves you can sort of get away with a bit, but
I think Basher Hawley played with a popped calf in one of the grand finals as well.
You get away more than a quad and a. Trust me, I was talking about my injuries before. I've done them all, but those a calf more than a quad and a hammy. Because that high end speed stuff, but I think his calf sounded quite significant when he did it, so it'd be interesting to sort of see.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what type of rehab he's done to get himself in a position to play. I mean, no doubt he would have, 24 hours around the clock, he would have been doing stuff. Just get your thoughts quickly on some of the current Tigers, if you keep track of them at all. But what do you think of the current crop running around? Obviously, quite a few young faces in the mix, even from, I suppose, with your academy developmental hat on. How do you see the progress of some of the young Tiger players like your Seth Campbells and Sam Banks and players like that?
Yeah, well, actually had a bit to do with Sam Banks when I coached the Allies stuff where they used to form the Queensland, Tassie, New South sort of Division 2 connection. So I remember Sam coming through and looks like he had a really good season in terms of just consistency. I probably can't go through. Like I've got my 3 teams that I try and follow the most, and obviously the Suns I probably follow a bit more being on the Gold Coast and the academy kids, and then watching a fair bit of Brisbane too, and then Richmond. I've lost track of a few of the names, but some of the kids that are coming through is really exciting. If you probably reel off a few for me, I'll probably
like Sam Lawler and Luke Traynor.
Yeah, so those guys are really good. Who's the what had Matty Knights is on number? Is it 33 up forward? No, might not.
Oh, we had Big Harry. Yeah, Big Harry.
33 is McIntosh. Yeah, so there's the one of the quick forwards there, the small forwards.
Jasper Elga was up there playing small forward. Ryan Mansell.
Ryan
Mansell, a little bit older.
He's so it's sort of those. I think the forward line's shaping up pretty well, and then down back looks really solid. Especially Voss had a really good year. Watched his year. The experience of who else is down there? You got
Broady down there.
Who's that?
Yeah, Nathan Broad and Ben Miller had pretty good years as well.
Premiership players, and a few times I tipped Richmond this year, not because of the heart, but you look across when they had their wins, a couple of those upsets. I looked at their side and I'm like, you've got 2 premiership players on each line, which really helps. And I've been involved in teams and organisations where you don't, like you've just got pure kids. And I think Richmond, if they can hold on to those premiership players for a bit longer to help, you just can't go blanket case. Sort of youth policy. I just don't think they can. So if they can hold, I think it's not too far. I'm really positive about the Tigers, and I'm not just saying it because of money. I think they can keep sort of like Austin still playing good footy, and I said before, Broad, if he can hang on. Miller's looks really good down back. Really like his game, and then through the midfield, like your midfield's pretty good. And you get a few more recruits and some draft picks, and those draft picks from last year, which was a great draft. If they can, get into their second year, then sort of you're up and running again. So it's exciting. I think I think good draft this year and next year. Obviously, the Tassie coming in, you make the most of that. Then let's go Tigers.
Someone else had a question in here about who's the best academy kid that you've coached?
Oh, it's a good question. Well, I'm a bit biased in terms of probably my connection with Jack Bowes have become really playing a grand final this week, which is really good. So Jack was my first graduate that came through the academy, and obviously he left to go to Geelong and chose a great club in Geelong to be able to now play in a grand final this weekend. So Jack's probably the longest that goes back. And then most talented probably coming through, there's a few of them, but Jed Walter I actually caught up for a coffee with today just to talk through his year. He's a bit frustrated in and out, but he's got some real sort of upside in what he can do. So probably the bookends there, sort of Jack with a connection, then Jed coming through, high draft pick, probably hasn't put it all together yet, but he's a chance. But then, sort of looking at, some of the likes of, Bodie Ewan had a really good run up in best and fairest last year at the Suns, plays a really good role down back. Connor Budrick played some good football this year, sort of forward and mid. And then you've got, Will Graham, who had some injuries. He's going to be a really good midfielder. So there's a few coming through, which is really exciting.
And they've got a couple more on their way this year as well in the draft, which look like absolute superstars. So the Suns, they're going to be set for a few years, aren't they?
They do. And I know the Tigers supporters probably might be sort of happy and about sort of the, and a lot of Southerners, I suppose. But if you, again, probably another topic for another night, but it's hard to attract. It's not as hard now. They're starting to win it, but it's hard to attract people to, well, Brisbane's because they're established, but to the Gold Coast. So part of the attraction is to have, sort of retention on your list through the academy. That's the whole strategy behind it. Now, if you get 5 kids in, the top 20 or something it's happened before, maybe there is a bit sort of an unfair advantage there, and maybe they do have to sort of make their mind up or a points deduction on a certain few only. So it's an interesting argument, but they're definitely working and it's doing wonders for the club.
It's giving more kids opportunities, I think, whether people like it or dislike it. It gives kids who maybe otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to play AFL football, and that's a really important thing to have. So, well, Andrew, thank you for jumping on tonight, mate. I really appreciate your time. All the best up there in Queensland with the academy. What's the website? If people want to check it out.
One-on-one-coaching.com.au, and then I said we're about to launch a sort of an offshoot to that with our software. And if you follow us on our socials or our website, you'll see that shortly. So if there's any coaches out there that are looking to sort of scale their business and that through software, we're doing that. But then we also help the consumer in find that right coach, so whether it's football or in time tennis, golf, or at the moment we've got a few cricket coaches on there in the off season in the summer. So really exciting. So one-on-one-coaching.com.au.
I think you helped Robert out. He mentioned that you had coached his son Lucas in one-on-one coaching in Palm Beach.
Yeah, I did. There you go. Palm Beach, just around the corner. So it's my local club and got some involvement there. So go Palmy.
Working a treat. Well, we'll drop the links in the description of the video as well so people can jump onto the site and check it all out. But thank you again, Andrew, for your time tonight, mate.
Thanks, Chris.
We look forward to seeing where it all goes in the future.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Nice. Thank you.